distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real privilege for me and an honor to be back at the MRC. I was here, as Professor Kwankam said, exactly a year ago, and it's good to note how much progress we've made over this past year. It seems at the focus of much of the activity that we're dealing with is the National E-Health Strategy. So you will notice that in the brochure for this meeting, my speech doesn't have a title. I was waiting to see what was hot in South Africa to actually focus my discussion. And thank goodness for the technology, you can actually do these things at the last minute. Unlike the days when we used to use Kodak slides and have to submit them weeks in advance. So I'm going to talk about what do we do beyond actually producing this lovely book titled The National E-Health Strategy of South Africa. Beyond that, what do we do? And I would like to share with you some of my suggestions as to what we should do. Oh, sorry. So I want to talk about a number of ideas. One, start with the two paradigms, which is more dollars for health, and the more relevant one to our enterprise, more health for the dollar. The e-health policy and strategy space, which you're mostly familiar with. I want to propose a number of structures for e-health strategy implementations, starting with what functions we expect such structures to carry out, and of course, as form follows function, propose certain structures, forms that would be important to implementing the strategy. And I think such structures would therefore be a good platform to address what I consider the e-health grand challenges. And there's 6 of them. I'll lay emphasis on 2 of them in this speech. And I want to close with an epilogue, which many of you have seen before. We'll get to that when we arrive at the end. This, again, my apologies for those of you who've seen some of these slides before. But why e-health? This is a scatter plot of, on the y-axis, spending on health from, I think it's most of the countries of the world. On the x-axis, GDP per capita. What we observe is a very strong correlation, R-squared of 0.95, I believe, between GDP per capita and spending on health. It makes intuitive sense. We spend on health in proportion to how much is produced by the economy as a whole. So that speaks to the paradigm that if we want to increase spending on health, we need to increase the GDP, the productive capacity of the entire economy. However, health spending does not translate directly to health benefits. This is another scatter plot. Again, on the vertical axis, you see this time one of the key indicators, under 5 mortality, MDG4. On the horizontal axis is GDP per capita, which, as we've seen in the previous slide, is a proxy for spending on health. There is no correlation in this scatter plot, unlike in the previous one. It's a log-log scale. But you notice the case of 2 countries, X and Y, which spend exactly the same amount per capita on health, but look at the under 5 mortality indicator values. There's a 60-point difference between country X and country Y. Look at 2 countries, A and B. They have the same very good low under 5 mortality figures, but there's a 10-fold difference in spending between country A and country B. Why all this variation? William Baumol, an economist in the 1960s, postulated that in a labor-intensive sector such as health, we cannot always translate capital into output. But there are two things, there are 5 things actually said, that can actually help us get more out of the system, or such systems. One of them is technology, the other is good management, which we all know depends also on technology. So that's the other part of the paradigm. If we want to get more health out of the dollars that we invest in the health sector, we need to use technology efficiently and effectively to arrive at these productivity gains. And apparently that message has come across because South Africa, like many countries, has invested heavily in developing a national e-health strategy, sort of the rails on which the whole e-health enterprise needs to run. I like to characterize this space, this e-health, particularly the policy and strategy space, and I think it's a 3-dimensional space with the pillars being the stakeholders, the process, and content. And I believe South Africa has done the right things, involved the right stakeholders. Perhaps not every last stakeholder category has been involved, but a broad spectrum of stakeholders have been involved in the production of this document called the National E-Health Strategy. The process itself has been inclusive, participatory, so that many voices have been heard in the development of the strategy. In terms of the content, if you look through, it has some of the usual topics and points that need to be covered in a strategy. I contend that these 3 dimensions span the space or they constitute a basis for the space for the mathematicians in the room, in that with these 3, you can actually span the entire policy and strategy space, and they provide the foundation, therefore, for further action. Who are some of the stakeholders? At a meeting yesterday on the strategy, we started identifying some of the stakeholders, and this is a slide I have from a previous discussion. It's the AGIC, the academia, government, industry, and civil society. I once dared to say that AGIC is what puts the magic in e-health, but some people didn't like that. And you can see some of the functions that these various categories of stakeholders undertake, and therefore what they bring to the table when you're developing a national strategy. At yesterday's meeting, for example, we had a good cross-section of these various categories of stakeholders. And the discussion was very, very frank. I was very impressed with the intensity, the commitment of the people. But it also, and because people were frank with their discussions, I think I should be frank with you, I think there were some empty seats at the table as well. I did not see, and it's not clear to me, who represents the voice of the beneficiaries. In one sense, we all do. We're all people key to e-health, in that we can be beneficiaries and sometimes providers or stewards of the system, sometimes sequentially, sometimes simultaneously. But I have not yet seen evidence that beneficiaries, the people whom the strategy, the technology is supposed to benefit, have actually had a voice other than through those who are both providers and stewards or professionals in this space. So patient groups, for example, civil society organizations of that type also would need to be involved. And fortunately, the production of a document is only the first major phase in a strategy process.